Management Chapter 8. Chapter 8 Managing Change and Innovation. Learning Outcomes. Define organizational change and compare and contrast views on the change process. Explain how to manage resistance to change. Discuss techniques for stimulating innovation. Describe what managers need to know about employee stress. Chapter Summary 8.1 Define organizational change and compare and contrast views on the change process. Organizational change is any alteration of an organization's people, structure, or technology. The calm waters metaphor of change suggests that change is an occasional disruption in the normal flow of events, and can be planned and managed as it happens, using Lewin's three-step change process: unfreezing, changing, and freezing. The Whitewater Rapids view of change suggests that change is ongoing and managing it is a continual process. 8.2 Explain how to manage resistance to change. People resist change because of uncertainty, habit, concern about personal loss, and the belief that a change is not in the organization's best interests. Techniques for managing resistance to change include education and communication, educating employees about and communicating to them the need for the change; participation, allowing employees to participate in the change process; facilitation and support, giving employees the support they need to implement the change; negotiation, exchanging something of value to reduce resistance; manipulation, and co-optation, using negative actions to influence; selecting people who are open to and accept change; and coercion, using direct threats or force. 8.3 Describe what managers need to know about employee stress. Stress is the adverse reaction people have to excessive pressure placed on them from extraordinary demands, constraints, or opportunities. The symptoms of stress can be physical, psychological, or behavioral. Stress can be caused by personal factors and by job-related factors. To help employees deal with stress, managers can address job-related factors by making sure an employee's abilities match the job requirements, improving organizational communications, using a performance planning program, or redesigning jobs. Addressing personal stress factors is trickier, but managers could offer employee counseling, time management programs, and wellness programs. 8.4 Discuss techniques for stimulating innovation. Creativity is the ability to combine ideas in a unique way or to make unusual associations between ideas. Innovation is turning the outcomes of the creative process into useful products or work methods. An innovative environment encompasses structural, cultural, and human resource variables. Important structural variables include an organic type structure, abundant resources, frequent communication between organizational units, minimal time pressure, and support. Important cultural variables include accepting ambiguity, tolerating the impractical, keeping external controls minimal, tolerating risk, tolerating conflict, focusing on ends not means, using an open system focus, and providing positive feedback. Important human resource variables include high commitment to training and development, high job security, and encouraging individuals to be idea champions. Understanding the chapter why is managing change an integral part of every manager's job. Contrast the calm waters and Whitewater Rapids metaphors of change. Which of these would you use to describe your current life? Why is that one your choice? Describe Lewin's three-step change process. How is it different from the change process needed in the Whitewater Rapids metaphor of change? How are opportunities, constraints, and demands related to stress? Give an example of each. Organizations typically have limits to how much change they can absorb. As a manager, what signs would you look for that might suggest your organization has exceeded its capacity to change? Why is organization development planned change? Explain how planned change is important for organizations in today's dynamic environment. How do creativity and innovation differ? Give an example of each. Research information on how to be a more creative person. Write down suggestions in a bulleted list format and be prepared to present your information in class. How does an innovative culture make an organization more effective? Do you think an innovative culture could ever make an organization less effective? Why or why not? When you find yourself experiencing dysfunctional stress, write down what's causing the stress, what stress symptoms you're exhibiting, and how you're dealing with the stress. Keep this information in a journal and evaluate how well your stress reducers are working and how you could handle stress better. Your goal is to get to a point where you recognize that you're stressed and can take positive actions to deal with the stress. Key terms: Type A personality, people who have a chronic sense of urgency and an excessive competitive drive. Type B personality people who are relaxed and easygoing and accept change easily. Employee assistance programs, EAPS, programs offered by organizations to help employees overcome personal and health-related problems. Wellness programs offered by organizations to help employees prevent health problems. Creativity, the ability to produce novel and useful ideas. Innovation, the process of taking a creative idea and turning it into a useful product, service, or method of operation. Organizational change, any alteration of an organization's people, structure, or technology. Change agents, people who act as change catalysts and assume the responsibility for managing the change process. Calm waters metaphor, a description of organizational change that likens that change to a large ship making a predictable trip across a calm sea and experiencing an occasional storm. White water rapids metaphor, a description of organizational change that likens that change to a small raft navigating a raging river. Organization development OD, efforts that assist organizational members with a planned change by focusing on their attitudes and values. Survey feedback, a method of assessing employees' attitudes toward and perceptions of a change. Process consultation, using outside consultants to assess organizational processes, such as workflow, informal intra-unit relationships, and formal communication channels. Stress, the adverse reaction people have to excessive pressure placed on them from extraordinary demands, constraints, or opportunities. Kiroshi, a Japanese term that refers to a sudden death caused by overworking. Stresses, factors that cause stress. Role conflicts, work expectations that are hard to satisfy. Role overload, having more work to accomplish than time permits. Role ambiguity, when role expectations are not clearly understood. 8.1 Define organizational change and compare and contrast views on the change process. Stress kills. We know that too much stress can be bad for our health and well-being. That connection proved itself painfully and tragically at France Telecom. Since early 2008, there have been more than 50 suicides of people who worked for the company. The situation captured the attention of the worldwide media, the public, and the French government because many of the suicides and more than a dozen failed suicide attempts were attributed to work-related problems. The masks worn by these protesting telecom employees say Lombard has killed me. Didier Lombard was the chairman of the board and chief executive officer of France Telecom when the suicides took place. Although France has a higher suicide rate than any other large Western country, this scenario was particularly troublesome. The spate of suicides highlighted a quirk at the heart of French society. Even with robust labor protection, workers see themselves as profoundly insecure in the face of globalization. With many complaining about being pushed beyond their limits, France isn't the only country dealing with worker suicides. Workplace conditions at China's Foxconn, the world's largest maker of electronic components, including the iPhone, iPod, and iPad, were strongly criticized after 11 Foxconn employees committed suicide. Stress can be an unfortunate consequence of change, and anxiety, both at work and personally. However, change is a constant for organizations and thus for managers. Large companies, small businesses, entrepreneurial startups, universities, hospitals, and even the military are changing the way they do things. Although change has always been a part of a manager's job, it's become even more SC in recent years, and because change can't be eliminated, managers must learn how to manage it successfully. In this chapter, we're going to look at organizational change efforts, the ways that managers can deal with the stress that exists in organizations, and how managers can stimulate innovation in their organizations. What is change and how do managers deal with it? When John Lechleiter assumed the CEO's job at Eli Lilly, he sent each of his senior executives a gift, a digital clock counting down, second by second, to October 23, 2011. That's the day Lilly's $5 billion a year schizophrenia pill, Zyprexa, was no longer under patent. By the end of 2016, Lilly stands to lose $10 billion in annual revenues as patents on 3 of its key drugs expire. Needless to say, the company has had to make some organizational changes as it picks up the pace of drug development. Lilly's managers are doing what managers everywhere must do: implement change. If it weren't for change, a manager's job would be relatively easy. Planning would be easier because tomorrow would be no different from today. The issue of organization design would be solved because the environment would be free from uncertainty, and there would be no need to adapt. Similarly, decision-making would be dramatically simplified because the outcome of each alternative could be predicted with near-pinpoint accuracy. It would also simplify the manager's job if competitors never introduced new products or services, if customers didn't make new demands, if government regulations were never modified, if technology never advanced, or if employees' needs always remained the same. But that's not the way it is. Change is an organizational reality. Most managers, at one point or another, will have to change some things in their workplace. We classify these changes as organizational change, which is any alteration of an organization's people, structure, or technology. See Exhibit 8-1. Let's look more closely at each of these three areas. Changing structure includes any alteration in authority relationships, coordination mechanisms, degree of centralization, job design, or similar organization structure variables. For instance, in previous chapters, we've mentioned that work process engineering, restructuring, and empowering result in decentralization, wider spans of control, reduced work specialization, and work teams. These structural components give employees the authority and means to implement process improvements. For instance, the creation of work teams that cut across departmental lines allows those people who understand a problem best to solve that problem. In addition, cross-functional work teams encourage cooperative problem-solving rather than us versus them situations. All of these situations may involve some type of structural change. Categories of organizational change: structure, authority relationships, coordinating mechanisms, job redesign, spans of control, technology, work processes, work methods, equipment, people, attitudes, expectations, perceptions, behavior. Changing technology encompasses modifications in the way work is done or the methods and amendment. One organizational area, in particular, where managers deal with change is continuous improvement initiatives, which are directed at developing technologies to better support better quality operations. Employees committed to continuous improvement are constantly looking for things to fix. Thus, work processes must be always subjected to fine-tuning. Such adaptability requires an extensive commitment to educating and training workers. Employees need skills training in problem-solving, decision-making, negotiation, statistical analysis, and team building, and they must be able to analyze and act on data. For example, Campbell Soup Company uses both technology and employee training to maintain its market-leading position in the soup industry. Changes in people refer to changes in employee attitudes, expectations, perceptions, or behaviors. The human dimension of change requires a workforce that's committed to quality and continuous improvement. Again, proper employee education and training are needed, as is a performance evaluation and reward system that supports and encourages those improvements. For example, successful programs put quality goals into bonus plans for executives and incentives for employees. Why do organizations need to change? In Chapter 2 we pointed out that both external and internal forces constrain managers. These same forces also bring about the need for change. Let's briefly review these factors. What external forces create a need to change? The external forces that create the need for organizational change come from various sources. In recent years, the marketplace has affected firms such as AT&T and Lowe's because of new competition. AT&T, for example, faces competition from local cable companies and from free internet services such as Skype. Lowe's, too, must now contend with a host of aggressive competitors such as Home Depot and Menards. Government laws and regulations are also an impetus for change. For example, when the Americans with Disabilities Act was signed into law, thousands of businesses were required to widen doorways, reconfigure restrooms, and add ramps. Even today, organizations continue to deal with the requirements of improving accessibility for the disabled. Technology also creates the need for organizational change. The internet has changed the way we get information, how products are sold, and how we get our work done. Technological advancements have created significant economies of scale for many organizations. For instance, technology allows Scottrade to offer its clients the opportunity to make online trades without a broker. The assembly line in many industries has also undergone dramatic change as employers replace human labor with technologically advanced mechanical robots. Also, the fluctuation in labor markets forces managers to initiate changes. For example, the shortage of registered nurses in the United States has led many hospital administrators to redesign nursing jobs and to alter their awards, and benefits packages for nurses, as well as join forces with local universities to address the nursing shortage. As the news headlines remind us, economic changes affect almost all organizations. For instance, prior to the mortgage market meltdown, low interest rates led to significant growth in the housing market. This growth meant more jobs, more employees hired, and significant increases in sales in other businesses that supported the building industry. However, as the economy soured, it had the opposite effect on the housing industry and other industries as credit markets dried up and businesses found it difficult to get the capital they needed to operate. And although it's been over a decade since 9/11, the airline industry is still dealing with the organizational changes forced on it by increased security measures and other environmental factors such as high fuel costs. Organizational change: any alteration of an organization's people, structure, or technology. What internal forces create a need to change? Internal forces can also create the need for organizational change. These internal forces tend to originate primarily from the internal operations of the organization or from the impact of external changes. It's also important to recognize that such changes are a normal part of the organizational life cycle. When managers redefine or modify an organization's strategy, that action often introduces a host of changes. For example, Nokia bringing in new equipment is an internal force for change. Because of this action, employees may face job redesign, undergo training to operate the new equipment, or be required to establish new interaction patterns within their work groups. Another internal force for change is that the composition of an organization's workforce changes in terms of age, education, gender, nationality, and so forth. A stable organization in which managers have been in their positions for years might need to restructure jobs in order to retain more ambitious employees by affording them some upward mobility. The compensation and benefit systems might also need to be reworked to reflect the needs of a diverse workforce and market forces in which certain skills are in short supply. Employee attitudes, such as increased job dissatisfaction, may lead to increased absenteeism, resignations, and even strikes. Such events will, in turn, often lead to changes in organizational policies and practices. Who initiates organizational change? Organizational changes need a catalyst. People who act as catalysts and assume the responsibility for managing the change process are called change agents. Any manager can be a change agent. When we talk about organizational change, we assume that it's initiated and carried out by a manager within the organization. However, the change agent could be a non-manager, for example, an internal staff specialist or an outside consultant whose expertise is in change implementation. For major system-wide changes, an organization will often hire outside consultants for advice and assistance. Because these consultants come from the outside, they offer an objective perspective that insiders usually lack. However, the problem is that outside consultants may not understand the organization's history, culture, operating procedures, and personnel. They are also prone to initiating more drastic changes than insiders, which can be either a benefit or a disadvantage because they don't have to live with the repercussions after the change is implemented. In contrast, internal managers who act as change agents may be more thoughtful and possibly more cautious because they must live with the consequences of their actions. How does organizational change happen? We often use two metaphors to clarify the change process. The calm waters metaphor envisions the organization as a large ship crossing a calm sea. The ship's captain and crew know exactly where they are going because they've made the trip many times before. Change appears as the occasional storm, a brief distraction in an otherwise calm and predictable trip. In the whitewater rapids metaphor, the organization is seen as a small raft navigating a raging river with uninterrupted whitewater rapids. Aboard the raft are half a dozen people who have never worked together before, who are totally unfamiliar with the river, who are unsure of their eventual destination, and who, as if things weren't bad enough, are traveling at night. In the whitewater rapids metaphor, change is the status quo and managing change is a continual process. These two metaphors represent distinctly different approaches to understanding and responding to change. Let's look closer at each one. What is the calm waters metaphor? Until recently, the calm waters metaphor dominated the thinking of practicing managers and academics. The prevailing model for handling change in such circumstances is best illustrated in Kurt Lewin's three-step description of the change process. See Exhibit 8-2. According to Lewin, successful change requires unfreezing the status quo. changing to a new state and freezing the new change to make it permanent. The status quo can be considered an equilibrium state. Unfreezing is necessary to move from this equilibrium. It can be achieved in one of three ways. The driving forces, which direct behavior away from the status quo, can be increased. The restraining forces, which hinder movement from the existing equilibrium, can be decreased. The two approaches can be combined. Once the situation has been unfrozen, the change itself can be implemented. However, the mere introduction of change doesn't ensure that it will take hold. The new situation, therefore, needs to be frozen so that it can be sustained over time. Unless this last step is done, it's likely that the change will be short-lived and employees will revert to the previous equilibrium state. The objective of freezing the entire equilibrium state, then, is to stabilize the new situation by balancing the driving and restraining forces. Note how Lewin's three-step process treats change as a break in the organization's equilibrium state. The status quo has been disturbed, and change is necessary to establish a new equilibrium state. Although this view might have been appropriate to the relatively calm environment faced by most organizations during the 20th century, it's increasingly obsolete as a description of the kinds of seas that current managers have to navigate. See the From the Past to the Present box for more information on Lewin and his organizational research. What is the Whitewater Rapids metaphor? Susan Whiting is the chair of Nielsen Media Research, the company best known for its television ratings, which are frequently used to determine how much advertisers pay for TV commercials. The media research business isn't what it used to be, however, as the internet, video on demand, cell phones, iPods, digital video recorders, and other changing technologies have made data collection much more challenging. Whiting says, if you look at a typical week I have, it's a combination of trying to lead a company in change in an industry in change. That's a pretty accurate description of what change is like in a second change metaphor. Whitewater Rapids. It's also consistent with a world that's increasingly dominated by information, ideas, and knowledge. To get a feeling of what managing change might be like in a Whitewater Rapids environment, consider attending a college that had the following rules. Courses vary in length. When you sign up, you don't know how long a course will run. It might go for 2 weeks or 30 weeks. Furthermore, the instructor can end a course at any time with no prior warning. If that isn't challenging enough, the length of the class changes each time it meets. Sometimes the class lasts 20 minutes, other times it runs for 3 hours, and the time of the next class meeting is set by the instructor during this class. There's one more thing. All exams are unannounced, so you have to be ready for a test at any time. To succeed in this type of environment, you'd have to respond quickly to changing conditions. Students who were overly structured or uncomfortable with change wouldn't succeed. Does every manager face a world of constant and chaotic change? No, not every manager faces such a world. However, the numbers who don't is dwindling. The stability and predictability of the calm waters metaphor don't exist. Disruptions in the status quo are not occasional and temporary, and they are not followed by a return to calm waters. Many managers never get out of the rapids. Like Susan Whiting just described, they face constant forces in the environment, external and internal, that bring about the need for organizational change. How do organizations implement planned changes? At the Wyndham Peachtree Conference Center in Georgia, businesses bring groups of employees to try their hand at the ancient Chinese water sport of dragon boat racing. Although the physical exercise is an added benefit, it's the team-building exercise in which participants learn about communication, collaboration, and commitment that's meant to be the longest lasting benefit. 12. We know that most changes employees experience in an organization don't happen by chance. Often managers make a concerted effort to alter some aspect of the organization. Whatever happens in terms of structure or technology ultimately affects organizational members. Efforts to assist organizational members with a planned change are referred to as organization development (OD). In facilitating long-term, organization-wide changes, OD focuses on constructively changing the attitudes and values of organization members, so that they can more readily adapt to and be more effective in achieving the new directions of the organization. 13. When OD efforts are planned, organization leaders are, in essence, attempting to change the organization's culture. However, a fundamental issue of OD is its reliance on employee participation to foster an environment in which open communication and trust exist. Is persons involved in OD efforts acknowledge that change can create stress for employees? Therefore, OD attempts to involve organizational members in changes that will affect their jobs, and seeks their input about how the change is affecting them. Just as Lewin suggested, any organizational activity that assists with implementing planned change can be viewed as an OD technique. However, the more popular OD efforts in organizations rely heavily on group interactions and cooperation, and include survey feedback, process consultation, team building, and intergroup development. Survey feedback efforts are designed to assess employee attitudes about, and perceptions of the change they are encountering. Employees are generally asked to respond to a set of specific questions regarding how they view such organizational aspects as decision-making, leadership, communication effectiveness, and satisfaction with their jobs, co-workers, and management. 16. The data that a change agent obtains are used to clarify problems that employees may be facing. As a result of this information, the change agent takes some action to remedy the problems. In process consultation, outside consultants help managers to perceive, understand, and act on organizational processes with which they must deal. These elements might include, for example, workflow, informal relationships among unit members, and formal communications channels. Consultants give managers insight into what is going on. It's important to recognize that consultants are not there to solve these problems. Rather, they act as coaches to help managers diagnose the interpersonal processes that need improvement. If managers, with the consultants' help, cannot solve the problem, the consultants will often help managers find experts who can. Organizations are made up of individuals working together to achieve some goals. Because organizational members must frequently interact with peers, a primary function of OD is to help them become a team. Team building is generally an activity that helps work groups set goals, develop positive interpersonal relationships, and clarify the roles, APD responsibilities of each team member. It's not always necessary to address each area because the group may be in agreement and understand what's expected of it. The primary focus of team building is to increase members' trust and openness toward one another. 18. Whereas team building focuses on helping a work group become more cohesive, intergroup development attempts to achieve the same results among different work groups. That is, intergroup development attempts to change attitudes, stereotypes, and perceptions that one group may have toward another group. In doing so, better coordination among the various groups can be achieved. How do managers manage resistance to change? We know that it's better for us to eat healthy and to be active, yet few of us follow that advice. We resist making changes in a lifestyle. Volkswagen Sweden and ad agency DDB Stockholm did an experiment to see if they could get people to change their behavior and take the healthier option of using the stairs instead of riding an escalator. How? They put a working piano keyboard on a stairway in a Stockholm subway station. You can see a video of it on YouTube, to see if commuters would use it. The experiment was a resounding success as stair traffic rose 66%. The lesson: people can change if you make the change appealing. Managers should be motivated to initiate change because they are concerned with improving their organization's effectiveness. But change isn't easy in any organization. It can be disruptive and scary. Organizations, and people within them, can build up inertia that causes them to resist any change, even if the change might be beneficial. In this section, we review why people in organizations resist change, and what can be done to lessen that resistance. Why do people resist organizational change? It's often said that most people hate any change that doesn't jingle in their pockets. This resistance to change is well documented. Why do people resist organizational change? The main reasons include uncertainty, habit, concern over personal loss, and the belief that the change is not in the organization's best interest. 21. Change replaces the known with uncertainty. No matter how much you may dislike attending college, or certain classes, at least you know what's expected of you. When you leave college for the world of full-time employment, you'll trade the known for the unknown. Employees in organizations are faced with similar uncertainty. For example, when quality control methods based on statistical models are introduced into manufacturing plants, many quality control inspectors have to learn the new methods. Some may fear that they will be unable to do so and may develop a negative attitude toward the change or behave poorly if required to use them. Another cause of resistance is that we do things out of habit. Every day when you go to school or work, you probably get there the same way, if you're like most people. We're creatures of habit. Life is complex enough, we don't want to have to consider the full range of options for the hundreds of decisions we make every day. To cope with this complexity, we relve on programmed responses, but when confronted with change, our tendency to respond in our accustomed ways becomes a source of resistance. The third cause of resistance is the fear of losing something already possessed. Change threatens the investment you've already made in the status quo. The more that people have invested in the current system, the more they resist change. Why? They fear losing status, money, authority, friendships, personal convenience, or other economic benefits that they value. This helps explain why older workers tend to resist change more than younger workers, since they generally have more invested in the current system and more to lose by changing. A final cause of resistance is a person's belief that the change is incompatible with the goals and interests of the organization. For instance, an employee who believes that a proposed new job procedure will reduce product quality can be expected to resist the change. This type of resistance can actually be beneficial to the organization if expressed in a positive way. What are some techniques for reducing resistance to organizational change? At an annual 401(k) enrollment meeting, the CEO of North American Tool, frustrated at his employees' disinterest in maxing out their investments, brought in a big bag, unzipped it, and upended it over a table. 23 cash poured out $9,832 to be exact, the amount employees had failed to claim the prior year. He gestured at the money and said, "This is your money. It should be in your pocket. Next year, do you want it on the table or in your pocket?" When the 401(k) enrollment forms were distributed, several individuals signed up. Sometimes to get people to change, you first have to get their attention. When managers see resistance to change as dysfunctional, what can they do? Several strategies have been suggested in dealing with resistance to change. These approaches include education and communication, participation, facilitation and support, negotiation, manipulation, and co-optation and coercion. These tactics are summarized here and described in Exhibit 8-3. Managers should view these techniques as tools and use the most appropriate one depending on the type and source of the resistance. Education and communication can help reduce resistance to change by helping employees see the logic of the change effort. This technique, of course, assumes that much of the resistance lies in misinformation or poor communication. Participation involves bringing those individuals directly affected by the proposed change into the decision-making process. Their participation allows these individuals to express their feelings, increase the quality of the process, and increase employee commitment to the final decision. Facilitation and support involve helping employees deal with the fear and anxiety associated with the change effort. This help may include employee counseling, therapy, new skills training, or a short paid leave of absence. Negotiation involves exchanging something of value for an agreement to lessen the resistance to the change effort. This resistance technique may be quite useful when the resistance comes from a powerful source. Manipulation and co-optation refer to covert attempts to influence others about the change. They may involve twisting or distorting facts to make the change appear more attractive. Finally, coercion can be used to deal with resistance to change. Coercion involves the use of direct threats or force against the resistors. What reaction do employees have to organizational change? For many employees, change creates stress. A dynamic and uncertain environment characterized by restructurings, downsizings, empowerment, and personal life matters has caused large numbers of employees to feel overworked and stressed out, as our opening case described. Sometimes the stress gets to be so intense that individuals respond in a drastic and tragic way. In this section, we'll review specifically what is meant by the term stress, what the symptoms of stress are, what causes stress, and what managers can do to reduce anxiety. What is stress? Stress is the adverse reaction people have to excessive pressure placed on them from extraordinary demands, constraints, or opportunities. For stress isn't always bad. Although it's often discussed in a negative context, stress can be positive, especially when it offers a potential gain. For instance, functional stress allows an athlete, stage performer, or employee to perform at his or her highest level at crucial times. However, stress is more often associated with constraints and demands. A constraint prevents you from doing what you desire. Demands refer to the loss of something desired. When you take a test at school or have your annual performance review at work, you feel stress because you confront opportunity, constraints, and demands. A good performance review may lead to a promotion, greater responsibilities, and a higher salary, but a poor review may keep you from getting a promotion. An extremely poor review might lead to your being fired. One other thing to understand about stress is that just because the conditions are right for stress to surface doesn't always mean it will. Two conditions are necessary for potential stress to become actual stress. First, there must be uncertainty over the outcome, and second, the outcome must be important. What are the symptoms of stress? We see stress in a number of ways. For instance, an employee who is experiencing high stress may become depressed, accident-prone, or argumentative, may have difficulty making routine decisions, may be easily distracted, and so on. As Exhibit 8-4 shows, stress symptoms can be grouped under three general categories: physical, psychological, and behavioral. All of these can significantly affect an employee's work. Too much stress can also have tragic consequences. In Japan, there's a stress phenomenon called kuroshi, pronounced kuroshi, which is translated literally as death from overwork. During the late 1980s, several high-ranking Japanese executives still in their prime years suddenly died without any previous sign of illness. 26 As public concern increased, even the Japanese Ministry of Labor got involved, and it now publishes statistics on the number of kuroshi deaths. As Japanese multinational companies expand operations to China, Korea, and Taiwan, it's feared that the kuroshi culture may follow. What causes stress? Stress can be caused by personal factors and by job-related factors called stressors. Clearly, change of any kind, personal or job-related, has the potential to cause stress because it involves demands, constraints, or opportunities. Organizations have no shortage of factors that can cause stress: pressures to avoid errors or complete tasks in a limited time period, changes in the way reports are filed, a demanding supervisor, and unpleasant co-workers are a few examples. Let's look at 5 categories of organizational stresses: task, role and interpersonal demands, organization structure, and organizational leadership. Task demands are factors related to an employee's job. They include the design of a person's job, autonomy, task variety, degree of automation, working conditions, and the physical work layout. Work quotas can put pressure on employees when their outcomes are perceived as excessive. 27 The more interdependence between an employee's tasks and the tasks of others, the more potential stress there is. Autonomy, on the other hand, tends to lessen stress. Jobs in which temperatures, noise, or other working conditions are dangerous or undesirable can increase anxiety. So too can working in an overcrowded room or in a visible location where interruptions are constant. Role demands relate to pressures placed on an employee as a function of the particular role he or she plays in the organization. Role conflicts create expectations that may be hard to reconcile or satisfy. Role overload is experienced when the employee is expected to do more than time permits. Role ambiguity is created when role expectations are not clearly understood, and the employee is not sure what he or she is to do. Interpersonal demands are pressures created by other employees. Lack of social support from colleagues and poor interpersonal relationships can cause considerable stress, especially among employees with a high social need. Organization structure can increase stress. Excessive rules and an employee's lack of opportunity to participate in decisions that affect him or her are examples of structural variables that might be potential sources of stress. Organizational leadership represents the supervisory style of the organization's managers. Some managers create a culture characterized by tension, fear, and anxiety. They establish unrealistic pressures to perform in the short run, impose excessively tight controls, and routinely fire employees who don't measure up. This style of leadership filters down through the organization and affects all employees. Personal factors that can create stress include family issues, personal economic problems, and inherent personality characteristics. Because employees bring their personal problems to work with them. A full understanding of employee stress requires a manager to be understanding of these personal factors. 28 Evidence also indicates that employees' personalities have an effect on how susceptible they are to stress. The most commonly used labels for these personality traits are Type A and Type B symptoms of stress: physical changes in metabolism, increased heart and breathing rates, raised blood pressure, headaches, and potential of heart attacks; psychological job-related dissatisfaction, tension, anxiety, irritability, boredom, and procrastination; behavioral changes in productivity, absenteeism, job turnover, changes in eating habits, increased smoking or consumption of alcohol, rapid speech, fidgeting, and sleep disorders. The Type A personality is characterized by chronic feelings of a sense of time urgency and excessive competitive drive, and difficulty accepting and enjoying leisure time. The opposite of Type A is the Type B personality. Type Bs never suffer from time urgency or impatience. Until quite recently, it was believed that typers were more likely to experience stress on and off the job. A closer analysis of the evidence, however, has produced new conclusions.